Okay, I'll make a start. So thanks everyone for coming along. Thanks to those of you who are joining us live and those who are watching later. Those of you who are joining us live through YouTube, be aware you can use the comments feature to leave your comments and your queries, and Shane Cronin will be there to respond to them or to gather them up so that we can respond to them perhaps at some later stage. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Gearoid O Suilleabhain. I'm head of the Department of Technology Enhanced Learning. The title I've given today's session is Online Remote and Blended Learning, or it mentions those terms at least. And those are things that, however we understand them, are definitely likely to be a very big part of the coming semester. And we may as well be honest and say that the challenges involved this time around might even be higher than they were last semester. So expectations will be higher, we know. And it does seem that there will be some scenarios, at least, in which we will have face-to-face events that have to be simultaneously broadcast or recorded, and just a number of maybe other ways in which that divide or that boundary between the digital and the physical is going to have to be crossed. But look, in a sense, what we do proceeds from what happened in the emergency remote teaching semester and the lessons we learned there. We've certainly been building on that. And so I'm going to begin with that, if that's okay. I'm going to focus particularly on a survey we did with staff and students and just give you some headline stuff to maybe explain some of the kind of proposals and guidelines we're going to offer later in the presentation. So look, you can see those response rate numbers there. That suggests findings that to some extent can be generalized, and as such, and on that basis, worth building on and worth starting with. There's probably people a lot more numerous than me listening in or listening later. And so just to say that the analysis doesn't really rise beyond descriptive statistics. I haven't done any cross tabulations or done much at all with the qualitative data. I would like, though, to give a shout out to Sean Lacey in the maths department, who is assisting me with that and has created the bar charts and so on that I'm going to show you in a second. What I won't be showing you, well, there's quite a few answers I'm not going to go into, but what I'm also not showing you is the various different data that we have from our e-learning systems, the learning analytics and other data from Canvas and from Big Blue Button and so forth. But let me start with this one, an interesting top line result for students. So I'm just going to alternate between staff and students as I go through it. Question asked here was, what technical support training did you make use of? Now there was a meeting this morning of the academic delivery group, and there was a lot of discussion there about the need to provide induction to Canvas and potentially on induction to Zoom for new students and potentially for not new students also. But it is interesting to see that students themselves last year, at least, or last semester, felt that they didn't need technical support. 66% of them at least thought as much, and much of the remainder just used Canvas Tier 1 support through phone or chat or email. I do remember talking to the Student Union president at the time, and he was indicating, yeah, that most students are familiar with Canvas. It cuts both ways. The result does, I think. One is maybe we could say, look, they're more digitally native, and maybe there's less for them to master. There's obviously more involved in using Canvas as a teacher than as a student, but there's also the possibility that maybe in some cases they overestimate their ability. I don't know, a similar question for staff, as part of the staff survey. I don't know that there was any lecturing staff at all who indicated that they didn't need technical support or training. And the very vast majority looked to the Department of Technology Enhanced Learning in one way or another. We did at one stage have 798 staff actually engaging with training with us on one day alone. There's some other data sources suggested in that list there as well. And I can say we were averaging something like 34 tickets a day in terms of our own support system. In terms of, and I'll be getting onto this quite soon for the new semester, but in terms of ways in which students engaged with classes, the vast majority was through Canvas, which was no surprise. So it came on top for staff and for students. It was kind of presented as level 1, or the kind of fundamental level for all remote teaching. Level 3, though, was actually live classes, and it's interesting to see such a high number here. No telling quite what the ratio was in terms of the question that was asked. But our sense from the stats was that a lot of lecturing staff did attempt to do live lecturing, primarily through Big Blue Button, but also through other means. So that's much the same question asked of staff there, asked in a slightly different way, but reasonable agreement with what the students said. Again, no surprise that Canvas was presented at level 1, but the live classes very, very high there, 78%, nearly more or less as high as what it was for Canvas. In terms of greatest challenges, it's interesting. Communication is a really big one. Communication was the top one for staff also, as I'll show you in a minute. These are the results for students. And it's interesting that there was no other common top 5 items for the two groups, even though the two questionnaires worked from a similar list. Excuse me. Now, I have a few things to say about communication towards the end, but keep it in mind, I guess. And also, I think, keep in mind that communication is more than just an admin function, to our mind at least. This is the, in terms of administrating a program or module. So a similar question for staff. Communication arguably here is at the heart of the top 2 items. So difficulties around communicating at a distance and difficulties dealing with student queries at a distance. Learning to use new systems was the third one there. Personally, I think we're very lucky to have Canvas in place for the remote teaching emergency, and lucky that so many staff were so good as to have learned how to use it. But obviously there's a big difference between using it as a complement for normal face-to-face delivery and using it for what became exclusively online teaching. And as I say, no other items in common between staff and students there. This is the second last question, I think, before I get into talking about what we're rolling out, as it were, for the coming semester. So this was back in June. Well, I think the survey went out at the end of May, and most people responded in the month of June. We didn't really know for certain what was going to happen in September. So the question was, assuming some portion of the next academic year is going to have a continuation of remote teaching and learning, what do you think would help you as a student? Communication, top 1 again. I don't have it here, but when staff and students were asked what the most common communication tools they used were, the very top item was email. Email is great, very low barriers to entry, but perhaps not the tool to reach for in terms of one-to-many communications or collaborative stuff or creating a kind of an online learning community. The second point there, having a more consistent approach is an understandable but not surprising one. So certainly within Canvas, as you move from module to module, it's plain to see that people have built their modules using somewhat different approaches, that they're often navigated in a very different way, and maybe according to very different interface metaphors or interface elements. In case I forget to say, people may have noticed, I sent out an email to CIT about it, that we have been able, and thanks to Shane, who's on the call for doing this, we were able to push down a template for each of the modules for next year. And we're hoping that that can bring some level of consistency without taking away, obviously, from the autonomy of the individual lecturer, as well as a sort of an e-learning designer. Similar question asked of staff. More time to develop resources for class is understandable. I'm not sure to what extent it's addressable. Maybe what might be of help is something I'll talk about in a while, the rollout of open educational resources, which are kind of openly licensed resources that people are free to take and remix with their content and their courses as they see fit. Point number 2 is more supportive guidance in how to teach effectively. I will be addressing that in a moment in terms of those guidelines I've promised. There was one last question, actually, and it's this. So, and I thought it might be good to finish on this bit, or finish this portion of my presentation with this bit. So, staff and students were asked a very similar question. How would you rate the support you received, either in terms of studying remotely or in implementing your remote teaching approach? So the rating from students for support received was a 3.3 out of 5 on average. That's running from poor to excellent. Similar, but not entirely equivalent question for staff had an average response rating of 4.1. Again, running from poor to excellent. I suppose at one level it's gratifying to see such a high score from staff, and there was a lot of qualitative comment also directed to our own department. 3.3 is not maybe a particularly damning indictment from students, and we don't, let's be honest, know what their rating would be for our normal face-to-face delivery. But still, there's room for improvement there, and we have some pointers about what to improve. And I think maybe we as a department and staff have a certain amount of autonomy in terms of addressing some of those points. Which brings me on to this, a framework for remote teaching and learning options. So this is what the website looked like last year, and we were really pushing out these 3 options to the fore. Canvas, screencasting, which is essentially recording what's on your screen, but you can also use it for basic video editing and narrated slideshows. And then finally, live classes delivered last year through Big Blue Button, but this year using a different system. This is a diagram. I'll just give people a moment to let their eyes run over this perhaps, but this is a much more expansive diagram. It is, I don't know, created, I suppose, with a desire to represent all components of our e-learning infrastructure, nearly all the granular components of Canvas itself. So Canvas is at its center here, and that's in part by way of encouraging people to see Canvas as being more than just a place to upload notes or to use as a kind of digital pigeonhole, but to use all of the different tools that it provides in these different categories here, from the asynchronous communication and collaboration to live classes, to content on demand, to classroom management, to support for summative and formative assessment. It's also an attempt to just capture what everybody told us they were using. So there's a lot of stuff here that we don't support in the Department of Technology Enhanced Learning, but which we know staff are using. So we're not trying to stamp it out or anything, we just don't directly support it. So a very good example there would be social media, which can be kind of live. So it's in that particular slice here, the live classes slice, but it doesn't have to be live. That's what asynchronous means, non-live or not in real time. But you know, I suppose that's another aspect of the diagram I'm trying to put across, that the further things are from the center, in a sense, the less we are directly supporting them. So we're directly supporting Canvas, obviously, and we're directly supporting things that are integrated into Canvas, like Turnitin, which people will have heard of, which is a plagiarism detection system, like something called Canvas Catalog, which I don't have time to talk about, but which has given us a lot of freedom in terms of, say, pushing out the Canvas-based induction course for staff, and I think a similar one soon for students. Screencasting is still there over here. Screencast-O-Matic, Big Blue Button is still there as well. Open educational resources are still there. I mentioned them a moment ago, so I shouldn't really go into any more detail with them, but just to say, look out for some workshops we'll be doing on open educational resources, or OER. This is stuff that's released under an open license. You can take it, use it, remix it on a no-cost basis. Big obvious benefit in terms of saving time, which was one of the big things that came back to us from the survey, from the staff survey. And you know, you're obviously getting to build on the work of others. Sharing back to the OER community is something that we might cover in a future workshop. One of the big changes is, so you know, I mentioned Big Blue Button is in the diagram, but to be honest, we haven't been best pleased with it, and we got a lot of negative feedback from staff on it. So it remains as part of the diagram, but we found it buggy and poorly supported. It was easy to get it switched on quickly, but some people, I think, felt they were just kind of limping along with it, really. So we'll continue to support staff who want to use Big Blue Button, but we're proposing something called Zoom instead. So Zoom, I'm sure people have heard of it. It's a system that we've been using for nearly 4 years now for our fully online programs. So those are the programs that have always been online before the pandemic. There's 25 of them at present. The system has had a good piloting, if you like, and we know how to support it, and we have a lot of training and help docs written about it. We had hoped to have it moved out before now. There was an IT security risk that was identified and that we had to kind of move past, but we have the green light now, and Zoom is going to be moved out to all staff. Another reason beyond our familiarity with it for choosing it is that Zoom and the people behind Canvas have a strategic partnership. So as a result, there's a really good integration between Zoom and Canvas that no other solution can beat. So that allows, for example, for recordings, if recordings are made, recordings to be auto-posted directly to the module in Canvas for viewing in Canvas, and it means you can launch your Zoom meetings from inside Canvas as well. It's not in the diagram, but it is going to give us what we're calling connected classroom implementations, or what is sometimes referred to as classroom capture. That means that there's a pretty kind of straightforward way to do a live broadcast or a recording from a lab or a classroom. These are just two diagrams from guidelines that I've shared with some heads of department already about ways in which, and thanks to Shane actually for putting this together, but these represent different approaches to this Zoom-based live screening, or live streaming rather, or recording of on-campus teaching and learning using a range of different cameras. So we have some suggested uses for things like document cameras and action cameras and smartphones and pan tilt zoom cameras. Now, to be clear, we can't do the work of installing all of this in classrooms. What we are proposing is to convert the training room in the Melbourne building into a kind of a model space to show how the different cameras and other equipment can be configured for different use cases, so that different departments can come up and have a look and figure out what they might want to do in terms of their own setup, if they're doing anything that involves, I don't know, maybe trying to live stream from a lab where the lecturer needs access to specialist equipment, or maybe there is one of those kind of awkward crossing over scenarios where there's a face-to-face class, but also a group of people at a distance. And we have a guide developed, as mentioned. There's also another version of Zoom called Zoom Rooms, which is more specifically set up for this kind of thing. It's a kind of a software-based video conferencing system that allows for wireless screen sharing and video conferencing and the linking together of a variety of different peripherals, from cameras and microphones to a tablet and TV displays and stuff like that. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff I covered there, and I didn't even get into half of the things in the bigger diagram. What I want to do, and I think I'll maybe just manage to keep it under the half hour as promised, but before I move on, maybe and complicate things even further, I'm just going to say that while there's a lot of stuff I'm throwing at you, I do think that in the majority of cases, this is what it's going to come down to: Canvas and Zoom, and probably mostly Canvas. So, and then as I have it here, thinking and talking about what it is you usually do, like gathering student work or student hand-ups, for example, and figuring out how to do that online. So you can gather up student work using the assignments feature in Canvas. You can draw on a whiteboard or a flip chart, or find an analog to doing that by using the Zoom whiteboard. You can break up students into different groups, as you might do in the face-to-face environment, by using breakout rooms. So look, I'll expand that diagram, but it's just to kind of reassure people things don't have to get super complicated. But let me super complicate things one last time and say, I think maybe, I hope maybe one of the benefits of visualizing things in terms of this this circle is that it allows us maybe to kind of capture or think about different approaches or different models of online teaching and learning. So in this one, maybe somebody's gone very big in terms of doing a lot of live classes and maybe a lot of kind of formative and summative assessment. And that would be perfectly okay. So not doing a whole lot by way of asynchronous communication, not doing a whole lot in terms of developing new content or using open educational resources. Alternatively, somebody might go the other way and might decide they're going to put together a largely asynchronous course. They're going to put together a lot of really nice content, and they're going to have lots of communication and collaboration possibilities, but they're just going to be non-live or asynchronous. Okay, so how do people decide? Well, last year, I don't think it was noticed, but we didn't foreground it. Let's say last year we had some tips on how to teach online, but this year, you know, we're going to go a lot further with this. We're going to emphasize this element a lot more. E-learning is about the bringing together of technology and pedagogy, and I think that the baseline that we seem to have achieved in terms of technical or procedural know-how allows us to emphasize this pedagogical stuff a lot more. And I think there's an appetite for it. So when as we saw earlier, when we asked staff what would be of most help to them in a new semester of remote teaching. The most popular response after more time was guidance on how to teach effectively. So we've come up with these guidelines. They're based on many years of doing fully online programs, and they're based on a lot of other similar guides that are out there. I'll put it together as a proper handout and maybe try and get it released next week with some explanatory kind of text. What I was keen to do, I suppose, was put stuff out there that can just be taken almost on face value as a sort of a checklist, but also stuff where you can dig quite a bit deeper if you wish, and I'll do that briefly in a second. Yeah, let me do that. Let me kind of run through each of them. So number one, plan what you want the students to do. That's pretty simple, but you know, sometimes we dive into things, particularly in a kind of an emergency environment. So planning, by the way, might be no more than a few rough notes of what you'd like the students to do or what you'd like them to achieve. But having these plans and then later communicating them really helps the students, really helps them prepare for what's coming down the line, and gives them the best chance to figure out how to manage their time, and helps them just prepare really for what's coming up. Your plan might be, you know, to say nothing more than, you know, at the end of the first 4 weeks, I'll have prepared everyone to do assignment 1 or what have you. You might want to go a lot deeper, and there's lots of instructional design frameworks and methodologies. One that's quick to get up and running with, again, with that emphasis on stuff that you can go deep with if you wish, but which you can get up and running with quickly, is a thing called backward design. So backward design is just a model for designing online learning, where you focus on the desired end result, I suppose, and working backwards. So you begin not with what resources you're going to use or what textbook you're going to use, but you focus on the learner and you think about what you want for them at the end of the process. So that could be the same as your learning outcomes, or it could be something something different. But you as a designer, then you identify what kind of learning evidence you would regard as proof of that desired end having been achieved, and then you work backwards from that end goal, and you intentionally plan and design and develop learning experiences for the students. So check that out, backward design. Another big thing, though, obviously, to be done in tandem is to figure out what tools or technologies you're going to use. So look, I've already been through a whole range of different tools in that earlier diagram. Some of them, as I've tried to explain, are directly supported. Some of them are inside Canvas. Some of them are outside it. Some of them are integrated with it. There are decisions to be made at a number of different levels. Small enough ones, like how you're going to maybe create or find a particular video that you want. But there are much bigger ones, like, say, the balance between live and not live, or synchronous and asynchronous. So I do think some people might be thinking of replacing all face-to-face classes, or all lectures at least, with Zoom sessions, but I think this might be a mistake. So be careful that way. So putting up non-live content is definitely more flexible from a learner's point of view. It's not just more time independent, but it's a better choice for students who have poor bandwidth. I didn't include it in the results there, but one of the survey results was that 15% of students would characterize their internet connection as being poor or unreliable. Yeah, I better finish up with that one, but whatever tool or technology you evaluate for using, be sure it's your learning goal and your learners, not the technology, as it were, that should be the deciding factor. Number 3, consider what you already have, what's already out there, and what already works. So look, the obvious issue, and we know this from the tickets coming in, the obvious issue that a lot of people grapple with in moving online is how to make or find enough course materials and course content. You might work already though from like a textbook or a series of PowerPoint slides that you've been developing over a long time, and you can continue to use those. But if things are fully online, there might be a whole lot of other things that you can integrate into the learning management system or signpost from it. So there's third-party courseware and publisher content, and the big option again is open educational resources. So you can find resources on places like OER Commons, Merlot, OpenStax, Khan Academy. We'll be doing workshops to indicate to people where they can search and browse through that content. So in general, anyway, it's not like you have to start from scratch. Think about the things you do in class already and find ways to do these things online. And if you find extra cool things that you can do online, then all the better. And remember, it doesn't always have to be high tech or media rich. Obviously, when you've figured out all of this stuff, tell the students how it's going to work and tell them what your expectations are for them. So whatever you decide to do, don't keep it to yourself. Find ways, and knowing students, find multiple ways to put it across to them. Definitely consider maybe doing an induction for your particular module. On a more granular level, definitely worth thinking about. We do this for the online courses, telling the students what you expect from them over a shorter kind of period of time. So it could be like a kind of a checklist, or you might kind of say, look, I want you to review all the notes that I've uploaded by the end of the week, or I want you to watch all the screencasts over the next 2 weeks, or I want you to go off and find a really good video that talks about something or other, or I want you all to attend a live online session that I'm going to do on Wednesday or what have you. So doing all of that just makes it explicit to the students what exactly they should be doing if they're not on campus. They figure that stuff out sometimes by being on campus, but you got to be extra clear with them if they're at a distance. You could consider maybe giving them some kind of schedule also. If I wouldn't be able to do it, but if you're somebody who's got things well planned, you might be able to say, look, in week 1, this is going to happen. And then at the end of that week, you'll want to have the following done. So just, I suppose, remember in face-to-face courses, in the normal way of things, you meet with students every week, same day, same time. It'll minimize the disruption and the confusion if you bring some kind of a structure like that online by telling them, for example, when they'll get a reply or could expect a reply to a question, and it'll just put them more at ease at this kind of uncertain time. I better start speeding up here. Make it clear to your students what you're doing to help them. And look, that's again just thinking about what happens in the face-to-face classroom. You spend a lot of time explaining to students how the instructional materials, how the textbook, how everything kind of fits in. You contextualize things for them, and equally a short explanation of what you've put up online and any particular areas of special importance, and how they should use the material towards their assessments is definitely going to improve their ability to engage and their engagement in general. Make it clear how they can communicate with you and each other. We saw how communication was such a really big issue for staff and students. So let them know how they should contact you. It's up to you. Is it email? Is it Canvas mail? Is it Canvas discussion? Let them know how often they should check in. And maybe you have some guidelines about how they should communicate as well. Maybe there's some guidelines around professional communication that you want them to follow. So that, again, they mightn't automatically translate the traditional face-to-face classroom way of communicating or those expectations to the online environment. So if you set those expectations from the start, you'll help them engage with you and communicate with each other in a more confident and more effective way. Also, I suppose making it clear maybe also involves modeling what your expectations are. So in the way that you communicate, make it clear to them how they should communicate. I'm nearly done. I should have said this is the last slide. Second last, but really important, try to create a sense of community. So there's a lot in the literature about how learning is social, how learning is really about joining communities, and how important peer learning and peer communication is. We do a lot of it for the online programs. It takes a lot of heat off us as lecturing staff if the students are talking to each other, if they form a kind of a group together and there's really solid kind of bonds there, you know. So your students, if they've not been online before, they mightn't be aware of the need to kind of establish an online presence, an online social presence, and how to connect with other students digitally. You know, so this can be really important. You can have your synchronous sessions through the likes of Zoom. That can be a handy way to create a sense of community. But for the online programs, what we often do is a very low-tech kind of icebreaker and other related activities on the discussion area inside in Canvas. And remember, in the first few weeks, students are really going to, particularly for first year, they're really going to lay the foundations for the informal support groups that are going to last them throughout college. So it's certainly going to be whatever about that, it's certainly going to be a lifetime in the early kind of stages of their course. So think about that. Finally, pay attention to what students are doing. Watch what they do. This is the corollary of the first point, really. You don't just plan what you want your students to do, you watch to see if they're doing it. So in Canvas, you can get lots of basic information about whether the students are logging in or not and what they're doing when they log in. And then there's other stuff like, you know, if they participate in the communication activities, show up for live sessions if you have them, you know, get involved in the run up to assessment deadlines. And, you know, it has a formative function for you also, for all of us. You know, ask yourself, well, were the expectations clear then? Did the students know what to do? And then obviously, you know, if there are at-risk students, you've got to think about some kind of intervention there. You know, if somebody isn't logging in at all, that's a really big red flag, especially if everything is happening online. Okay, that's kind of it. I didn't quite get it into the half an hour, but pretty close. So I've talked about last semester, I've talked about our data from it and what we've learned from it. I've talked about options for the coming semester. I've talked about guidelines that we consider important. That's the stuff here. I'm going to try and do a handout about it and send it out. There's going to be a host of training coming down the line next week. We were a bit delayed with the Zoom rollout, but that's coming. There's already, though, a lot of content and resources on the website. Go to tell.cit.ie. Maybe Shane can share that through the comments section there. Any queries, please, tell.team@cit.ie. This connects to a kind of a help desk or ticketing system, so stuff doesn't get missed, like it might if you send it to me, for example. I'll be talking to you all again. I'll be sending out emails, but I really want to say the very best of luck with the new semester. People have been great. I don't think that can be said often enough. Everyone has risen to this unprecedented, extraordinary challenge, and it's really to the net benefit of CIT and our students and our traditions of academic quality and student experience. So look, we as a department, the TEL department, will be there as much as we can, helping out and responding to any new requests as they arise. And I gather even today, by the way, there will be some kind of guidance emanating from the academic delivery group, which will hopefully provide some direction and clarity. But I'm just going to stop sharing there and wish you all the best of luck. Thanks so much.